am Charlie, I'm back. We need to talk.
Have you ever heard of the Nintendo Wii? Try the iQue Wii. Nintendo and many other console makers release alternate versions of their consoles, mostly due to the law of them not being able to release consoles in those countries. Back in 2017, the Nintendo Switch released all over the world on March 3rd. Everyone bought a copy of the system, bought Breath of the Wild, Super Bomberman R, and 1-2 Switch, but one country, one very important country, missed out.
China.
In China, video games have been banned for an extremely long time. Nintendo needed some sort of brand in order to legally release their video games in China, and even then, these games had to go through an immense amount of censorship, and that's still the case. But in more recent years, China has become slightly more looser, which led Nintendo to finally release the Nintendo Switch in China under the Nintendo name.
Kinda.
You've heard of Tencent, right? If not, Tencent is a giant Chinese media company that has released all forms of media, with one of the major parts of their company being Tencent Games. Tencent Games has helped out with releasing some major games in China, such as Minecraft, City Skylines, Stardew Valley, along with making some of their own games, along with also owning major stakes in large video game companies like Supercell, Turtle Rock Studios, Riot Games, Platinum Games, and even Discord. In 2019, Tencent and Nintendo teamed up to release the Nintendo Switch as the Tencent Nintendo Switch, alongside a select few games developed mainly by Nintendo and Ubisoft, like Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, a timed exclusive Rabbids game, and Super Mario Odyssey. This version of the Nintendo Switch is no different to any other version of the Nintendo Switch in hardware, however it is the only Switch that's region locked. So the games for the console are actually the only games you can play on it, alongside a very select few games that are on the eShop. The Nintendo Switch, however, makes the very first Chinese Nintendo product that has Nintendo in the name, in modern times. As for many of their older consoles, they were known as iQue. iQue was a division of Nintendo specifically to release their games in China and localize their games. Nowadays, they're more of a background team, helping Nintendo on very specific things, such as making the Nintendo 64 emulator for the Nintendo Switch that's used on Nintendo Switch Online. But back in the early 2000s, they released many of Nintendo's classic consoles. They began with the iQue Player in 2003.
Now logically, you would think that a console coming out in 2003 would be somehow connected to the GameCube, right?
No. Instead, this is a Nintendo 64, and is supposed to be a handheld console, but in the same vein as like a plug-and-play console. This is because, technically, the video game ban is only for home consoles, so although this plugs into a TV, on a very strange technicality, this is a handheld. This has the games built in, with you either having to buy these games at an iQue depot or online, with it coming pre-installed with Dr. Mario 64, making it the best-selling game for the console. Oh, thank God. The games available were older Nintendo 64 games with some features added and some removed, like adding a name-saving system for some games, but removing support for the Rumble Pack, because there was no Rumble Pack. The games available were Wave Race 64, Star Fox 64, Dr. Mario 64, Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Mario Kart 64, F-Zero X, Yoshi's Story, Paper Mario, Sin and Punishment, Excitebike 64, Super Smash Bros., Custom Robo, and Animal Crossing.
Animal Crossing was originally a game for the Nintendo 64 known as Animal Forest, just in case you were wondering. Then it was re-released on the GameCube once it got out to America and everywhere else. And then Japan got two other versions of the game, being Animal Forest or Animal Crossing Plus, and then Animal Crossing or Forest E for the e-reader. There's a lot of versions of the game.
There was only one Nintendo 64 game cancelled, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, alongside NES and SNES support being cut before launch. Now once again, you would think that the iQue Player being a Nintendo 64, it would have been quickly dropped for Nintendo's next console, but nope! The iQue Player was supported until 2016 and was taken offline in 2018. That's right, an official Nintendo 64 was supported by Nintendo up until the Nintendo Switch's second year of life. The iQ Player is the most common and most known iQ product, but a lot of Nintendo's other consoles also got the iQ treatment. However, it wasn't as hidden as the iQ Player was. Game Boys in China actually have a bit of a wild history dating back to the original DMG model. There's very little known about the DMG Game Boy in China that I could actually find. Only one video on YouTube talks about the Manny Game Boy uploaded by Womprats. Now, along with Womprats having the cleanest Game Boy and Game Boy cartridges I've ever seen, you'll see that although this console was distributed by Manny, it's still labelled as a Nintendo Game Boy. The console took a lot longer to release in China, but it wasn't the only Nintendo product to actually be released by Manny. YouTube user Game Interest found something known as the Radio Boy. According to this video, the Radio Boy was licensed by Nintendo, but this, alongside most of Manny's other Game Boy related products, was released outside of China. Eventually, once Nintendo was running iQ, China saw the release of the iQ Game Boy Advance. This console came bundled with Super Mario Advance and Wario Land 4, with the iQ Advance SP quickly coming in to take over the original. This was all an effort to fight the imported Nintendo Game Boy Advances coming into China, and it really didn't help that the iQ counterpart could play any region's games.
Next, of course, came the dual-screen multimedia interactive system. Duh!
The iQ DS, otherwise known as the dual-screen multimedia interactive system, released in China with Nintendogs pre-installed. There's not much to say about the DS.
They also released a 3DS, and forgot to put any games on the console!
But the more interesting iQ release around this time was the iQ Wii.
If you don't know, there are actually other countries that surround China that are sorta kinda China, but not really, but sorta kinda are. We have regular China, otherwise known as the People's Republic of China, Taiwan, otherwise known as the Republic of China, no peoples, and Hong Kong, otherwise known as Hong Kong Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. All three countries of video games, region-wise, are treated pretty much the same. But Hong Kong and Taiwan get more games because they didn't have the video game ban, unlike China. But sometimes Hong Kong and Taiwan don't get video game releases, just like China. For example, I don't think the Wii U came out in any of those countries. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't found any source anywhere telling me that the Wii U actually came out in any of those countries. They would have had to have imported them from Japan. However, this is how iQ comes into play.
iQ really wanted to release the Wii in China to coincide with the 2008 Olympic Games, but it just never happened. Even Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games was meant to be a launch title with the iQ Wii. There's not a lot known about the iQ Wii, at least from what I could find, but officially it was cancelled and announced that it would release in Hong Kong under the Nintendo branding, making the dream of the iQ Wii dead. However, suddenly, out of the blue, the Wii released in Hong Kong under the Nintendo branding.
It also released under the iQ branding. Sorta.
Now, finding photos of the consoles is incredibly hard and makes me think it doesn't exist. But the games are easy to find, and they have the iQ branding on the games. I swear to you, one day I was on Syndico and I swear I saw a Wii box that had iQ labelled on it. Maybe I'm making it up, maybe it's a false memory, but I swear to you I saw it. Wii games in China did eventually come out in 2018, yes, after the Nintendo Switch, and it released on the Nvidia Shield portable console. These games were HD versions of these Wii games, and honestly are some of the best ways to play them. You had games like Donkey Kong Country Returns, New Super Mario Bros. Wii, and Super Mario Galaxy, which looks like the basis of the Super Mario 3D All-Stars version of the game, and Mario Kart Wii. Oh, Mario Kart Wii was cancelled because the government stopped it. It sucks that the best version of many of these Wii games was stuck in China on the Nvidia Shield. It would have been amazing to see these definitive versions of these games. But sadly, the games aren't even available in China anymore because they were only digital. And not much of them were backed up for us to play either. It would have been so cool to play New Super Mario Bros. Wii in HD without having to go to the Dolphin emulator and change a few things. Imagine if this came to the Switch! Obviously, the Switch got New Super Mario Bros. U, but having all 4 games would have been such a cool thing.
Now, China wasn't the only country to get Nintendo games released under a different name. See, South Korea and Japan didn't really have that great of a relationship. So when Nintendo wanted to release the NES in South Korea, they couldn't. So they needed some sort of loophole to be able to release the NES in South Korea without it being made by Nintendo, because that's a Japanese company. Nintendo contacted their friends over at Hyundai, yes, the car company, to release the NES as the Hyundai Comboy.
The console is pretty much identical to a normal NES, to the point where in English it literally says Nintendo Entertainment System Korean version. And only a very small amount of games actually came out for the console, being Anticipation, Balloon Fight, Batman, Blaster Master, Bubble Bobble, Castlevania 1 and 2, Cobra Triangle, Double Dribble, Vaccinated, Ghosts and Goblins, Goonies 2, Gunsmoke, Hogan's Alley, Ice Climber, Ice Hocker, Kid Icarus, Knight Rider, Kung Fu, The Legend of Zelda 1 and 2, Life Force, Mega Man 3, Metal Gear, Metroid, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, Pinbot, Pro Wrestling, RC Pro, Rad Racer, Robo Warrior, Rygar, Duck Hunt, Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Spike, V-Ball, Tetris, Tiger Heli, To the Earth, Top Gun, Track and Field 2, and Trojan. Not much, I know. Hyundai and Nintendo didn't stop at the NES though. There's also the Hyundai Mini Comboy, their version of the Game Boy. The Hyundai Super Comboy, the SNES, taking up the PAL and Japanese design, and the Hyundai Comboy 64, which is the Nintendo 64. Again, all of these consoles are identical to their other country counterparts, they just have different names.
Nintendo wasn't the only company affected by the Japan and South Korea conflict. There was also Sega!
Instead of teaming up with Hyundai, Sega went to Samsung to release the Game Boy.
I wish I was making this stuff up. Sega released the Game Boy before Nintendo did.
After the release of the Game Boy though, it was changed to the Aladdin Boy. The Game Boy obviously was just a reskinned Sega Master System, which made the Sega Mega Drive the Super Game Boy.
Again?
Once again, Sega beat Nintendo to the punch, calling something the Super Game Boy before Nintendo could call their add-on to the SNES the Super Game Boy. This was then later changed to the Super Aladdin Boy. Every console is just the same thing, just with a different name. So of course, everything fell under the Aladdin branding. The Sega CD became the CD Aladdin Boy, the Sega Game Gear became the handy Game Boy. Are you kidding me?
The Game Boy's biggest competitor, the Game Gear, in South Korea was also known as the Game Boy. And no, this one didn't get changed to Aladdin Boy. It just stayed as Game Boy. I guess it's pretty lucky that the Game Boy was known as the Hyundai Mini Comboy, I guess.
Once we got to the Sega Saturn, Samsung became a lot less creative. The Sega Saturn was just known as the Samsung Saturn, and the Sega Pico, the educational Sega console, was just known as the Pico. However, as it goes, the Samsung Saturn sold terribly, which led Samsung to leave the video game industry forever.
Unless you count the new one, which was a DVD player and a video game console that was in collaboration with Toshiba, RCA, Motorola, and Samsung.
Sega now didn't have anyone to distribute the Saturn, so Kama Entertainment came into the rescue and released it as the Sega Saturn. Finally, they called it the Sega Saturn, but this was just a quick fix. They needed someone to distribute the upcoming Sega Dreamcast, so who did they turn to?
You've gotta be kidding me, Hyundai again?
Hyundai and Sega formed a partnership together to bring arcade games to South Korea, alongside bringing Sega games to the PC. Through this collaboration, Hyundai announced that they would bring the Dreamcast to South Korea. This was in 1998. It never happened. They never released it in South Korea. They just imported Japanese Dreamcast to South Korea. How fantastic!
But how could I forget the most fascinating release that Nintendo ever did? In Australia, the NES is the Mattel version!